Slave Zero X is a 2.5D action game that released on the PC, Xbox Series X, PS4 and 5, and the Nintendo Switch on February 21st, 2024 for the price of $24.99. Well, at least the PC version did. This review was done on the PC, although I will say I couldn't see the Switch version of the game when looking for it on the store, so maybe it's coming later? Regardless, its action will remind you of spectacle games like Devil May Cry, or fighting games such as Guilty Gear. With a neo-punk aesthetic and about 25 stages of difficult combat, can Slave Zero X earn a spot in your library? Or will it be beaten down like the citizens of this dystopian world? Let's find out, shall we? The game starts with you taking control of Sho, a guardian that's trained for years to undertake a journey to murder the leader of Mega City S19, the Sovereign Khan. He's your typical horrible dystopian leader that has selfishly led the city to high levels of fascism, poverty, and probably drowning puppies for the sake of it. Sadly, despite his training, the master of Sho doesn't seem to think Sho's ready, and that leads to Sho going into a room and taking a biomech known as X, which I'll define as some cross between a Transformer and Venom, but more on that relationship later. Let's first dive into the main portion of this dish, the gameplay. Each level has you scroll along, get it to an area, have a bunch of enemies spawn, and have you defeat that set of enemies while minimizing damage against you. Then you rinse and repeat. You do that with your main weapon, your katana. You have quick slashes that can be directionally done, and your hits can easily be timed and comboed through a series of different timings with your light and heavy attack buttons. Granted, you don't have a screen that will tell you a list of combos. This is something that you'll have to learn via experience, and one of the first things that the game could do better. The fact is, it does not introduce the different mechanics that it has very well. Great, you explained it all on one set of intro screens, but maybe putting a tutorial together to understand how the pieces go together would have been more appropriate here. Some of these mechanics involve your meter. Yes, you have a meter in this game, and it can be used very much like modern fighting games would. You could do EX slashes by hitting the X and then the Y button very shortly afterward. It's not necessarily hitting X and Y at the same time from my experience, it's X and then very shortly after Y. These hits do harder, better, faster, stronger attacks that can help lead to juggling and opening up defenses. If you have full meter, you can activate Fatal Sync, which allows you to use EX moves throughout its lifespan and also earns health back while active when you hit enemies, which is vital. This is the main way you're going to recover life in this game. And considering some of the levels and their difficulty, get this through your head right now. This is paramount to learn. I didn't realize this up until around the 4th level, and it would have made things so much easier. In fact, fighting game fans are going to recognize a lot of the mechanics present in the game, because the game does borrow a lot from the genre, and that's on all avenues. I mean, don't tell me you don't see Akuma's dive kick here, even with the lowered gravity. You can see moves that can hit behind you, even with them hitting forward, those back hits that you'd see in jump-ins. You also have a specialized burst move, which can act as a combo breaker when you are getting hit and juggled, which will happen more often than you think. But on the other hand, you can use that to refill your meter during a series of attacks. Hell, the game has jump cancels. I'm still unsure if I'm doing them, but they exist. So how does that work in terms of combat? Well, that's not an easy question to answer, mostly because of the game's mixture of strengths and weaknesses. Truth be told, I see a game that is going to be very decisive for the audiences out there. The main crux of the problem lies in the level structure, pacing, and difficulty spikes that occur that may lead to throwing controllers at certain points. It's a game that's almost designed to tilt you in certain ways. let me explain. When the game is working well, the game cycles between what I would call a power fantasy to a difficult yet doable sections that test your might without breaking your back. The combo system and juggling is inherently fun at its core. There is a lot to mastering the combos and how you can get the extra hits out of enemies by delaying a certain attack or throwing down a fire to help keep them in the air for more time. Sure, enemies here still can be trouble and can take health off of you, but the challenge it gives you feels doable in a lot of these cases, and it doesn't feel too repetitive in a lot of these instances. The game starts to build momentum where you're starting to get into a groove, and like spectacle action games before it, it's a lovely cavalcade of violence. The basic enemies in general do a good job of giving a slight threat that could be still used as fodder, but the game isn't shy about throwing them out in numbers, especially as the game goes on, and that's a good thing. The thing is, you can even get juggled by these enemies in those numbers, and if you don't have that breaker, you can actually get juggled in one combo to death. But obviously that's your own fault for not saving that resource, so yeah, it is your fault, although it can feel cheap at times. On the flip side, the bosses, while mostly easier than I expected for a game going for a higher difficulty, they are good challenge for the most part. I in particular loved the Enyo challenge, which focused on timing and air hits, and while it took a couple of attempts, none of these bosses frustrated me greatly. But you see, the main problem lies in one enemy type that really screws with the game: the mini-bosses. Not only do these enemies have a reasonable amount of health and fast attacks most of the time, but they also usually have awkward attacks that aren't easy to dodge or parry that consistently, especially when there are other, more smaller enemies in the room. I haven't mentioned it, but yes, dodging enemy attacks is usually easy, especially without long cooldowns on them. But even when trying to dodge this attack, for example, the swing of the weapon actually has some frames on the back that can hit you that do reasonable damage. There's not a good place to dodge here if you're in that, well, swing space. And the thing is, that's most of what you come across in these various mini-bosses. Faster, awkward attacks that will drain you considerably of your resources, if not kill you repeatedly. I know other reviewers hated this mini-boss in particular, and I definitely can understand that. Between his quick gun attack, his very long ranges on his kicks, and just feeling hard to read, I get it. But this guy was my kryptonite. He just would always give me so many problems where I'd have to start over 5, 6, 9 times to get by him. And the fact is, the attacks should be readable, but for some reason I just couldn't. I just had trouble reading the animation to understand what he was about to do. And that leads me to the other big problem when it comes to the combat, and in particular, the level design. What makes all of this worse is that at times, you may face mini-bosses in tandem or back-to-back without any sort of checkpoint in between them. This spikes the frustration so badly at times where if you know what's good for you, you'll walk away from the game for a bit to try to cool down. I understand that the creators of Slave Zero X were probably going for a more difficult gaming experience. And you know what? That's totally fine. I understand that. Do I think the game would be more accessible if there was a difficulty that maybe had some more checkpoints thrown into it? Yeah, I do. But even me, who has a history of playing games like Strider, Battletoads, Ninja Gaiden, and grew up on some frustrating games, this game almost brought me to a point of rage. Sure, you can grind older levels to use the upgrade system to give yourself more health, faster meter, so on and so forth. Even though those values can really get up there, at least you can do it. But even then, there were points, especially in the last 3 levels, where I legitimately wondered if it was tested that thoroughly when it came to the experience. a lot of bullshit can happen here where attacks come off screen and hit you, and you're just like, how was I supposed to dodge that? How am I supposed to dodge these particular enemies coming at me at once? It just felt like it needed a little bit more time in the oven in this case. In addition, I also need to mention the issues that other reviewers ran into the non-PC version of this game. Let me be clear, I did not run into any significant bug of any sort or even performance issue while playing Slave Zero X on the PC. But many others have run into major issues with the console versions of the game, which I will link in the description below. In particular, the problems that Defunct Games, someone who I respect as a reviewer, ran into were so bad, it literally killed any enjoyment of the game. It crashed that often to the point where it just wasn't worth it. I will do my best to update the description of this review with the status of those versions as they get fixes. And the fact is, I would actually put it in the review if the old annotation system existed on YouTube, but, you know, they got rid of that useful feature. Until further notice, I wouldn't even touch those versions of the game. And while they are working on those issues in terms of Poppyworks, I am concerned that they got released at all, especially the PlayStation version of the game. The amount of crashes seen, that's unheard of. What frustrates me greatly about the entire game and its gameplay experience is that when the game actually got really creative at certain points with levels and enemies, I did appreciate the way the game mixed things up. Even though it was a hurdle, I loved the implementation of the sniper portion of the game in the second boss's area. It forced you to learn moving around a lot more often, and I loved the touch of actually allowing other enemies to be lured into it and actually hit them, even to the point of extending combos. That idea is fantastic and I love it. The core systems here are fun. These sections that are a little bit out there are fun, but the roadmap of the game's levels don't take advantage of it in the way that it should, and it feels like something that will be fantastic when it's appropriately adjusted. A lot of my other complaints about the game and its gameplay are small, but did add up. There were times where the camera, it didn't move the way I think it should. Like, I'm not in the center of the screen here, and I can't see what 100% is going on. There are times where the enemy is just off screen that I tried to juggle on the wall, and it started to get a little frustrating. Also, this early game jump, let me just clue you in. You can Mega Man X jump on this, aka jump repeatedly on this wall. There's really no point before this that you do that, and I just kept thinking that I need to hit the big jump before that train hit, and this is one of those situations where a section that forced you to do that type of jump without a hazard would have been appropriate. I do want to move on to the presentation, because it's one of the standout elements of the game. Sure, we've seen other games mix up a 2D and 3D environment before, but Slave Zero X does really feel like some cross-up between Mischief Makers, Strider, and just anime art in general. The sharpness of the hero's design and how it plays against the background in most cases is striking without being burdensome. You can see everything you're doing and you're not straining yourself to catch what your character is doing. What's actually cool about this is that despite seemingly being of different presentation styles between the foreground of the character and enemies and the background, they still mesh together quite well. They actually work in tandem. The environments, however, are a cavalcade of fantastic storytelling and great visual flair. From the early game slums with graffiti and advertisements highlighting the desperation and poverty, to the late game pristine temples showing the upper elite want for luxury, symmetry, and perfection. There's a ton of detail here to take in, showing the state of the world, but what surprised me was the sheer amount of different items in the environment specifically in the early and mid game. Now, I'd expect a lot of art assets to be reused in levels. I mean, it makes sense in some ways. You're going to see the same posters, in different parts of the city, and that would make sense from a world building standpoint. But Slave Zero did not skimp out here. Almost every item of graffiti and advertisement is new, and honestly makes you stop and appreciate them, when you're not smashing things left and right. Now, I will say that at times this game felt oddly influenced presentation-wise when it came to specific designs. Like, when I saw this enemy, am I the only one who thought of Reinhardt from Overwatch? I mean, even this attack he does seems a little familiar. Now, the thing is, it never gets to the point of blatant copying, more like heavily influencing. And I would be really curious on how many influences this game took in making some of its enemy designs in particular. I will also mention that some of the in-game purchases with the currency that you can unlock new suit styles, but in particular, you can unlock new filters, like scan lines and older CRT-like presentations, which is cool and can add a little bit of nostalgia. But then there were filters that I'm sure they happened in the old era that, maybe you plugged something in wrong, but, who is actually playing the game with this filter on? I want to know, because Jesus Christ, my eyes are burning more than cutting up onions for French onion soup. The use of lighting in the game is also a highlight, as the dark sections or very specifically lit up sections of the game really give the game a fantastic mood in several sections. And to be honest, it really is something that this engine and future elements of this game can really work off of. It's some of the game's best work when it comes to immersion. As for the game's voice acting, it's pretty good. Each of the characters are able to give layers to their performance, while still being able to add cheese to appreciate cutscenes and situation. This is across the board too. Even the smallest of performances are able to convey the scenes quite well, and in particular, Shows and X's voice actors do a great job of highlighting their back and forth. Take a listen and hear what I'm talking about.
As many lives as you want, you're still no match for the purity of my bloodline. You hope to prove yourself? Make up for that embarrassing display against Sarabaka? I'll be waiting in the White Pentagon. There, we can settle things man to man. Do you hear me, devil? Red blood, white bone, blue steel. You will not wake me from my American dream.
This cheap shit barely hits me. Take some more then. Not like you'll be using it. Justice is divine. Huh? Come at me, Frank! I'll eat you!
Uriel and his biomecha need dark matter to function. That's why he's never left the heart. If we destroy those infusers, we cut off his supply.
It's not fair. Why wasn't I chosen to receive that treatment? What makes Uriel's biomecha so special?
Would you really have wanted that?
I want to become the perfect weapon. It's what I was made for, what I was promised.
Down my sights, a little devil.
Enyo!
Beloved by the bullet, second of the 5 calamities.
Not going to face me in person?
I don't really see the benefit of in-person interactions. All I need in the world is my aim, my armory, and my beautiful bullets. This next one's going to split your pointy little head.
As the sound, it's crunchy in all the right ways. Hearing the slashes and the hits, along with the grunts of enemies and show, really does add to the spectacle. And things like the explosion of an enemy flying apart is a little bit more satisfying than it should be. Granted, there were times where I was hoping for more, I guess, but I'm not sure what sounds I was looking for. Maybe some background noise from the crowds that are there or the few people that you see. But listen to what I'm talking about here. It's a good mixture of great and well, mostly great.
There, we can settle things man to man. Do you hear me, Double? Red blood, white bone, blue steel. You will not wake me from my American dream.
As for music, I admit that I'm somewhat disappointed here. Like, the music does complement the action in a lot of ways, but I admit it never really stood out to me, and I don't feel like I want to listen to it outside of the game. There's a lot I could say about it, but just listen and hear what I'm talking about. Finally, let's finish off with the story, because this may be the most overlooked aspect of Slave Zero, and it's rather solid for an action game like this. The main story is one that you've seen before, a hero going against corrupt government with a couple of helping resources, combined with the chosen hero trope. Sorta. Basically, you can sum it as Dolph Ziggler's run when AJ Styles was champion. Yeah, here's a clip.
Should have been me. It should have been me.
The game plays with the concept of chosen versus driven rather well, having Sho's initial rebellious attitude drive him forward, but also come to understand how his choices led to the choices that others made. It pairs well with X and the symbiotic nature of their relationship. X will fight Sho at times, but also will feed into Sho's wants as well. I do like the backstory here given the Sho with his friend / implied love, and the dynamic it creates early on, as you wondered what happened to him and what exactly you're truly fighting. It adds depth to Sho and how he doesn't like X looking in on his dreams, how he treasured them, and yet also seems to be weak to them. Actually, I do like almost every character here, especially the boss characters. They ham it up in all the right ways, especially the good old American way boss. In addition, I also like how these bosses still can find things to respect about their bitter enemies. It actually adds a lot to the story in small ways. It humanizes them even with the horrors that they are inflicting upon people. I like how the story takes the media aspect and actually, well, really integrates it into the story as well. The fact is, those little touches really sold the dystopian world here. Granted, I also think that the gameplay actually hurts the overall story because of the pacing issues that I mentioned before. You start to ignore parts of the story or forget them with all the attempts that you're going through at times, and you just start to zone out with the words on the screen, especially if you've seen them before. Really, what the game gives you in terms of the story is a good basis, and then if you let your imagination run wild with the environmental storytelling, you can see a really fleshed out world. Yes, you do have those little extras that you can find from the Golden Soldiers that will give you some lore and some information, but really, I just enjoyed picturing what came of this world. How did we get here, and how did these characters evolve into their form as of right now. In the end, though, Slave Zero X is a weird little game. On one hand, when it is hitting on all cylinders, it is fantastic. You keep the combos going, you're appreciating the challenge, and you're just enjoying yourself left to right. But then you slam into a roadblock. You get frustrated and you want to throw the game out. Now, granted, you can come back after a little time and you'll probably make a little bit more progress, but you'll feel like you're stepping on thumbtacks. Sure, you're making progress, but you're hurting yourself a little bit more and more along the way. Now, for masochists and sadists, you probably are enjoying that, but for others, that's going to be a problem. The fact is, this game's frustration factor is pretty high, and you can be a game that's difficult and not have this level of frustration to it. It really falls into the niche game category for me. If you love difficult action games, this is a game that you'll want to pick up. But if you're not necessarily the biggest fan of them, or are just more casual action game fan, you may want to wait on this because, well, the frustration factor may get to you. And that's why the game gets a 74 out of 100. Making it a niche buy, meaning that those who love the genre should buy it now, but others, you should wait for a sale. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match the game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. Now, in this case, I do have to make a very big disclaimer. You do want to make sure that you check the description to see the status of the console versions of the game. As updates happen, you will take the enhancers that deal with the consoles in particular and throw them out because, well, they're fixed. But this game, even beyond that, will have a lot of different people with a lot of different scores because, well, it's that subjective of a game. You're gonna either love it or hate it. Anyway, that's it for this review. The next review on this channel will be Berserk Boy, which will be coming out Wednesday. I know this review will be coming out on the weekend, which is very unusual for me, but I wanted to try something a little bit different in terms of that. And if you like what you see, or like what you heard, hit that like button and, subscribe to the channel. Or share the video with a friend. And of course, I'm always taking feedback, and leave that feedback in the comments section below. I've been trying new audio settings. In particular, I'm trying some voice plugins in terms of, trying to balance my voice. So let me know what you think of this actual video. Anyway, that's it for now. And as always, keep on gaming.